So just a little bit about what we'll be talking about. We're basically just shedding some light on JobKeeper, which is why we're chatting to Michael Yarrow from DigitPro. Michael is our go-to expert on this subject. He is also a member of Victory Officers. Michael has over 12 years experience in the accounting and finance industry, and he's the founder of DigitPro Bookkeeping and Consulting. That's a business he started after seeing a gap in the industry, providing high-level management accounting to SMEs. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand it over to you, for now to give us an overview of what's happening.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate, for the introduction. So I guess part of the reason why I'm doing this is in a way to kind of, I think with the JobKeeper and pretty much all the other government incentive handout, I guess to even preface what it is that the government's main aim is to get employees to retain their staff, right? So in the core of everything that they've done is all about, all the incentives are based on you continuing to employ so they don't have a high unemployment rate, because that is kind of like if unemployment rate rises, things go horrible, and they don't want to do that. So every single incentive they're doing, including the JobKeeper, is for that, right? And the other thing as well, the JobKeeper is probably the only one out of the other, sort of Victorian and probably Australian incentives that actually pays back to owners who don't have employees. So this is probably the only one that's suitable to that as well. So I guess the way I kind of wanted to run it is more of a Q&A. I'm pretty sure everyone's kind of read a ton about it. There's so much information out there. It's constantly changing. So I guess from that point of view, I wanted to run it more of a Q&A so that people can put up questions and then answer them, and I can answer them as best as possible, as well as, if I don't know the answer, then I can look it up for you as well. Because I think that, there's a ton of different, ways to interpret the information, and not all of it, like the ATO still haven't finalized a few portions of what it is. So, for example, the alternate, income test still hasn't been, put out, but I think that, we can talk about, kind of like the risks that you should take, based on certain scenarios. So I'll kind of give a quick overview of kind of what I think are the key points, and then we'll just go into Q&A mode because I'm sure everyone has a bunch of questions. So number one, we could have started registering from the 20th of April onwards, which is great. So people can apply through the business portal if they want to do it themselves, or they can get their tax agent to apply through the portal. It's a fairly simple process. You can just basically, you need your, if you're doing it for yourself on your business point of view, you have to get a MyGov ID, sign in, and the form takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Now, but then there's a bit of information you might have to fill out that you might not know. The period that it covers is from the 30th of March to the 27th of September, which is 13 prescribed fortnights. So, and it works in an arrears sort of manner. So what you do, you pay it to your staff, and then you get reimbursed it, you have a lodgement, which you have 7 days to lodge, and then you will get the money back, but they haven't really specified how quick the money is going to come back into your account, but I imagine it would be fairly quick. Now, think of it, there's two kind of like sections. There's business eligibility and there's staff eligibility, which are two things. So first, from a business eligibility requirement, you need to be able to show, like if you're not like a charity, which is a different one, and so from a requirement, if you have under 1 billion turnover, which I imagine is majority of people, you're going for the 30% decline in GST turnover test, which is effectively trading income. It doesn't include rent. It doesn't include management fees. It's purely 30% down on trading income. Now, if you can prove that either by projection or actuals, if you're in one of the testing periods that have actuals, then you qualify for the test. So there's a couple of testing periods, which is monthly from effectively March to September. March, April, May, June, July, August, September. Now, if you in an ideal sense, what you're trying to do is be eligible for one of the earlier testing periods, because the earlier you qualify, the more of the incentive you get. So for example, if I qualify in March, I get the full 6-month incentive. If I qualify for April, I get the full 6-month incentive. But if I only qualify in May, then I only get 5 months of the incentive. So you will want to qualify earlier. But if you do not, you should not be claiming it. Now, they've also got a quarterly testing period. So for example, there's one from the first quarterly testing period is from April to June. Now, if, for example, in April, you do not meet the turnover test, you can then try to meet it for the April to June period. And if you meet it for that, then you're qualified for the 6 months. So the reason why they put the quarterly one in there is because some businesses have lumpy income. So for example, I might be a builder and I might only invoice, big amounts in May, June. So when you're looking at your comparative period, it's not a good comparison. So they've given you the quarterly option. And just in case people don't understand comparative period, March 2020 to March 2019, April 2020 to April 2019, or from the quarter point of view, June 20 quarter versus the June 19 quarter. So the way the ATO basically, what the ATO have said is that once you meet the turnover test, you do not have to retest for that, right? So if I meet the eligibility requirements in April, I do not have to retest in May, June, July, but, and then I'm eligible for the 6 months, right? So you don't have to start going back and retesting. However, part of the monthly lodgements, you will have to put in what your turnover was for that month and what it was for the next month. So if you're giving average projections, it might come back and bite you in the ass. So I guess from that, so I was talking about that, and so the projection. Now, employee eligibility, I think, is probably the next block that I want to talk about, and then we can just go quickly into the Q&As. So from a employee eligibility, number one, they have to be plus 16 years. They have to be 16 years or over as at 1st of March 2020. Now, that's number one. Then you have a full-time, they were either full-time or part-time, and they were employed 1st of March 2020. Now, some people might have only been paid on the 2nd or 3rd of March, their first payment, but I believe they've said they were employed, so maybe you can go back to a contract and argue that point. So I think those ones, that was like a mini thing that we found. Some people were just employed like a couple of days after. If you've got an employment contract, then you can probably go and say, yep, well, they were employed at that date, or, but otherwise you might be taking a risk on that. They haven't really, gone through what the particular details are on that. So, so that's for the full-time or part-timers. Then you've got your casual employee. So they're eligible providing they have been there for longer than 12 months. So they had to have been employed before 1st of March 2019, or they don't fit the eligibility requirements. They can only claim it once. So they can't be claiming it from another employer, but they're going to be signing a declaration basically saying that I'm not claiming it from another employer. They have to fill in these JobKeeper forms. So, you're hoping that they don't do it twice, but effectively they're signing one saying, that they do. Now, the next one, they have to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident. Now, this one I've kind of like called the ATO on because, there are some people on, so temp visas are out. Anyone who's on a working holiday, anyone who's on a temp working visa, they're out. Unfortunately, if you think about it, right, from a job seeker, if they're eligible for the job seeker, then they will be eligible for the JobKeeper. The design of this is kind of like you have the same sort of eligibility requirements. So if they can go to the government and say, hey, can you give me Centrelink handouts? Then they're eligible, because if they're eligible for that, then they would be eligible for the JobKeeper. Whereas if they're not, if you don't think they would be eligible for the job seeker, then they're not going to be eligible for the job keeper. So, and then the other one is a subclass 444 visa, which is effectively a New Zealand person who's basically living in Australia, which again, not sure how many people. So I guess that's kind of like the core, what I think is the understanding of what it is.
Now, I do have a question because I know that at Victory, we have a lot of people that are obviously at kind of the beginning of their business journey. And you mentioned that, for example, say seasonal employees would have lumpy income, i.e. they only get it, maybe seasonally. What about those people that, had projections for a future that now can't happen, but don't necessarily have the earning history to back that up?
Yeah, so the alternate test is going to be the biggest thing, right? So some people aren't going to have the prior year revenue to actually to back it up. So for example, you've either started a new business or you've so I'll start with that one first, because say you start a new business, they've actually put something specifically out in the explanatory memorandum that basically says that we will do an alternate turnover test, and you can still apply to the commissioner, but it's not guaranteed at the moment how they're going to, set that alternate test. And a lot of these, decisions that you're going to make is the biggest issue that I have, is that you effectively have to front up this money, right? You have to pay your employees, let's say you've been, I would say, like, if you're in a shutdown period, right? So if you're running a pub and you're forced to shut down, I would say you've got pretty good grounds, and I would be, I'd be willing to take that bet. But, if you're running another business that has just had a down in turnover, you're in advertising, you've had a down in turnover, and you just started your business and you can sort of see the drop off, going for this is kind of a danger, because effectively you can apply for it, and you're going to pay out that money to staff members, or your decision to keep on staff members might be, might be different, if you weren't going to receive it, but you're effectively going to pay this out, and then they might tell you you're not eligible. So at the moment, there's no specific, they haven't put out what the alternate test is. So it's kind of a risk that you're putting on, and you've got to probably assess that risk and assess what your downturn is, and make sure that, you think that that's something that's will get a good response at the moment.
Okay, beautiful. Now I've got a couple of questions. So first off, if someone started working and signed the employment contract after the beginning of March this year as a full-time employee, would they still be eligible for the April JobKeeper reassessment?
Yeah.
And sorry if you've answered this already.
No, that's absolutely fine. So I think, so here's the thing, right? The employment contract, like if I even read to you the form, I'm gonna just give me 1 second, because there's an employment nomination form. Part of this, it reads, as of 1st of March 2020, you were an permanent employee or casual employee employed on a regular systematic basis. So as of March 20, were they a permanent employee, right? And the answer to that is, if I would argue, if they have a signed employment contract, at that point they were employed. They might not be working, but they were employed. And from that point of view, then we can look at their eligibility. But you've got to think, like, where is the touch point with the ATO? When you lodge your TFN declaration form, there is going to be a date on that. Or, if you lodge it through your accounting software, Xero QBO, there's a touch point there for when you lodge it. When did you lodge that form? Look at that. And if you want to take that, like, there might be a risk involved, because they haven't really clarified it, but they basically said that on the 1st of March, if you are eligible, like, it would be perfect if they had worked a day before, and if only their payment date was, like, say, the 3rd of March, then I would be 100%. But there is a risk involved that they haven't, I've called them up, they haven't clarified it. They said, that, they weren't able to clarify it for me, unfortunately.
Okay. I have a question from Sally. She says, hello, what is a method for calculating the 30% drop in income?
So the way they've prescribed, is this, sorry, Sally, can I ask, is this for, let's say, the actual projection, or is that and potentially maybe what business are you in actually?
Sal, if you want to answer, I've just taken you off mute.
Okay, so it's actual and health business.
Yeah, health business. Yep.
Provision of health services.
Perfect. So you've got so a lot of so you're a service-based business. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Right. So the way you want to look at it is like, from your projection of income, you will have you know, where, you know, your business income at let's say March, for example, right? And so April, you know, let's say you've done 15 days of trading, you can potentially do an estimate, like let's say it's the 23rd of April at the moment, you could probably estimate what your April is going to look like, because you can probably estimate the sales for 7 days of what, based on the trend of April. Would that be something you could do?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. So the way the ATO look at it is they're going to look at it and go, all right, great. So is the projection that you've put in there reasonable, right? So if I've made, you know, 30, like let's say 23 grand for the month, it is reasonable for me to say that I will continue making $1,000 per day, and then I will get to $30,000, right? Now, then I look at my revenue for the 2019 financial year, and let's say it was $60,000. I could reasonably say I qualify for April because I've got a 50% decline in that revenue, right? It's more about how reasonable your methodology is. And what's going to eventually happen is that they're going to verify that information on the amounts that you lodge on your BAS. So you want to have a reasonable explanation to the ATO to say, well, by April to 23rd, I knew I was getting $1,000 a day, and therefore my projection is, you know, for that month was correct. Now, I might do better in May and June, but at the end of the day, you're getting assessed on that April month. So from that point of view, you were eligible at April, and you can go on that, providing that your projection was reasonable.
So my question is, will each employee in the business get the same payment, which is what, like roughly $1,500 fortnightly, regardless of the cut to their salary?
Yes, I actually have I have a little test that I might project onto everyone, because I think that one's a really good example of kind of like how it works. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of, it's kind of like a bit of a benefit for certain people, because, you know, let's say if I earned under $1,500, I'm actually getting a pretty good benefit, because effectively the idea of this is that there is a minimum that staff are effectively going to get paid. So we kind of like created a calculator of how much the JobKeeper sort of would be, you know, in terms of what, you know, how it works. Now, I'll start off with this. So for example, you know, let's say for the fortnight, so they're working on fortnight periods. So the first fortnight is the 30th of March to the 12th of April. Now, if for that fortnight, I only earned $500, right? Through my labor, I've only earned $500. I get superannuation, fine, right? My gross pay for that normal period would have been $500. However, I am meant to make a minimum of $1,500. So therefore, I need to get added $1,000 in my JobKeeper, like as a JobKeeper, to my allowance. So I'm actually going to make more money than I've actually worked. Now, come say that's $1,000, right? Then what ends up happening is my JobKeeper amount actually moves down to $500. I worked $1,000 with my labor, but I'm then going to get a top up of $500. But if, for example, my employer is $2,000, if I got $2,000 for my labor, what ends up happening is, from an employee point of view, they get nothing. They've worked, great. They've earned the minimum that they need to earn. That $1,500 now acts as a wage subsidy for your employer. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I just had to unmute myself. It does.
That's all good.
Very, very well said. All right, guys. Michael, thank you so much.
Awesome.
And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, if you have any other questions, I mean, I'm sure you can add them to LinkedIn.
Yeah, sweet. Anyone can
figure out
add
a
me on
way.
LinkedIn and shoot me some questions. That'll be sweet.
Beautiful. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much again, and chat to you all soon.
All right.
See ya.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.